how practice helps make learning perfect. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. A little bit about practice, and that involves something like this. When you're driving home, maybe if you have a car, and you've driven home a lot of times, maybe hundreds of times, you get so used to driving home that you can do it without even thinking about it. My question for you is, does this involve learning? That's what we're going to get to. In the meantime, we have to cover just a little bit about how your brain learns. So it turns out that your brain has lots of cells called neurons, and these cells connect together in long-term memory when you learn something. And so they form this set of links that's thick and really strong. And that is placed in long-term memory in the neocortex. And this involves why and how you can be successful in your learning. It turns out that there are two different ways your brain learns, and both of them are very, very important. One involves something that is called the declarative pathway of learning, and it goes through the hippocampus. Now, you might be thinking, who cares what kind of pathway my learning goes through? But you'll see, it actually makes a big difference. The second pathway is actually just as important as the first, and that's called the procedural pathway. And that goes through an area called the basal ganglia. And as it turns out, when you're learning something, you need sets of links that have been deposited from both pathways in order to be able to use whatever you've learned. We're going to dive a little bit deeper now, and I want to give you a little bit of neural shorthand. And what I mean by this is when you have a neuron, there's a typical neuron right there. So you've got like an axon reaching out, and you've got these legs that are called dendrites. And what neurons do is they reach out and they make those connections, as I'd shown before. And those connections relate to whatever you're learning. So whether you're learning a dance step, or how to take a derivative in math, or how to conjugate a verb, whatever you're learning, you're making those connections. Now, that's a pretty complex picture that you're seeing here. So let's simplify it the way that neuroscientists do. What they do is they'll have these little dots, and each dot represents a neuron, and the lines in between those dots represent the dendrites and axons that are making the connections. So here we've got this set of dot circles that represent something you've learned. The more you practice with whatever you've learned, the stronger and thicker those lines become. You actually make new connections. You even reach out and make connections with other things. So those thoughts, those things that you're learning, those are stored, as I mentioned, in the neocortex. And you might wonder, what the heck is a neocortex, and why on earth do I have to put any information there? Well, the neocortex, as it turns out, it's on the surface of your brain. So those dot circles, they are stored on the surface of the brain, and this is what that surface of the brain actually looks like. Look at that. It's very thin. So you take that thin surface off. It's only about 1 millimeter thick. And once you've taken that surface and spread it all out, it's about maybe 2/3 of a meter by 2/3 of a meter. And that's where your little dot circles of the new information you're learning are stored. So here we've got dot circles, and if you look, they're stored And they're really, really tiny. In fact, they're so tiny you can't even see where they are. But you've got lots and lots of information stored on that neocortical sheet. So when you're learning declaratively, remember that's that first pathway that goes from working memory, which is kind of like short-term memory, but don't tell neuroscientists I said that because there's a slight difference. So anyway, you've got working memory in the neocortex, and then what's going on is it sends information through the hippocampus to be stored in long-term memory. So that's that sweep of declarative learning. But it turns out that the more you practice, the more you actually make it so that you don't even need the hippocampus anymore. You can even reach out and grab those sets of links from long-term memory into working memory, that short-term place that you're just working with something that you need right now. You can grab it in, and voila! Suddenly you can conjugate verbs. You can calculate the perimeter of a geometric object. You can do all sorts of things just by drawing on your long-term memory. As I mentioned before, the brain deposits sets of links through two different pathways. We've got that declarative through the hippocampus, and we've got the procedural through the basal ganglia. And you need both systems in order to be able to learn and use something effectively that you've learned. If we're trying to understand the difference between those sets of links that are deposited declaratively versus procedurally, let's just take a quick comparison. Now, when you're learning something declaratively, that's kind of like what I'm doing here right now. I am explaining something step by step to you. So you're very conscious of what I'm saying. Procedurally, however, you're not conscious of it. So remember that car we saw at the very beginning? That car, as it turns out, you could drive home habitually without even thinking about it because you had learned how to drive home so well through your procedural system that you didn't have to think about it and you're not conscious of it. So declarative learning, as it turns out, develops through explicit instruction, just like what I'm doing here now. But procedural learning, on the other hand, it develops through a lot of practice. So you learn math, you do lots of different practice problems, it begins to seem very, very natural. Or you're learning a language. You practice a lot of verb conjugations. After a while, it becomes very natural and easy. So spaced repetition, which is doing something over a number of days and repeating what you're learning over a number of days, is a powerful way to learn procedurally. Another way to learn is to use interleaving. For example, let's say that you are learning how to conjugate verbs in Spanish. So you learn the present tense, you learn the past tense, you learn the future tense, and each one of these tenses you're practicing with, but you don't actually mix them up. Sometimes you just do present, future, and so forth, but you're not mixing them up. The best way to learn procedurally is to get them in mind, but then mix up those tenses just like you do in real life, and that will help your procedural system to really get those sets of links down. Declarative learning, you can explain what you've learned. Now, procedural learning, you often cannot explain it. So what I mean by that is, let's say tying your shoelace. You learn to tie your shoelace procedurally. And so then that means that if you're trying to explain it to somebody else, it's really tough to do. Or if I asked you how to, which fingers hit which keys on the keyboard, you probably wouldn't even be consciously aware of what keys your fingers were hitting. So it's much harder to explain procedurally learned information. Declarative involves step-by-step learning. But procedural often involves very complicated patterns. So children, for example, they learn a new language, but when they learn that new language, they learn it procedurally. It's very complex, but they're able to learn through their procedural system so they can do it fluently and quickly. And in fact, declarative learning, it's actually very quick to learn, but it's very slow to use it. So what that means is if I learn a list of vocabulary words in a foreign language, when I face someone who's a speaker of that foreign language, I can end up kind of tongue-tied because I'm not fluent with it. I'm not quick at using it. But on the other hand, procedural learning, if I've learned something by practicing a whole bunch, so that takes time, I can be very quick with it. Здравствуйте. You can say hello in Russian if you have practiced enough times. So it's very fast to use, but slow to learn. It's also, this is the kind of thing, let's say you see 1 over k as in a mathematical formula. If you know your mathematics, you can instantly see the relationship that is actually equal to k. Now, declarative learning, very flexible. You can change your learning if you figure out you've made a mistake. But the procedural system, on the other hand, is very inflexible. So that means you can type quickly on a keyboard, but if some little rascal comes and reprograms your keyboard, it's not fast at all for you to type, and it takes you quite a while to relearn this new keyboard. So declarative learning then is you learn it largely through explanation. Procedural is practice. Practice is what helps with that type of setting those procedural links in long-term memory. Now, our best bet, really, when we're learning well, is to learn both declaratively and procedurally. Have links that are in both, made through both systems. But as it turns out, let's see, when you are learning something declaratively, and let's say you like learning declaratively, you may actually de-emphasize your learning procedurally. And in some cases, it seems that students, for example, with dyslexia, may learn better declaratively, and they don't learn as well procedurally. Whereas, on the other hand, a student who might have autism or some sort of autistic spectrum disorder, they might learn better procedurally, but not as well declaratively. So then, what that means is if you force every student to always be able to explain whatever they've learned, you may actually make some students very frustrated because they can know it really well, but they simply can't explain it. They can just do it. You know, sometimes that's just good enough. Overall, for most of our students, we would like both declarative and procedural learning to take place. So the more you can help both systems, the better you can be. But if you eliminate rote learning, in other words, you just say, oh, drill and kill is always so bad, you have actually just removed the easiest, best way the brain has to handle routine learning tasks. So don't think of it as drill and kill. Think of it more like drill and skill. So remember that road you're driving easily along? You don't even have to think about it. That comes through practice. And if you simply allow your children to routinely practice each day, you are being a hero. Thank you so much.